Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Watercolor Scientist, where we ask weird questions, we test our hypotheses, and we share our results with the world. Today's experiment is one that I promised in my last video, and it investigates a rumor that I've heard for a long time. Are Phoenix Professional watercolors secretly the same as Winsor and Newton Professional watercolors? I recently bought the Phoenix Professional 36 tube set, and today I'll be comparing them directly to my Winsor & Newton professional paints pair by pair. Before we begin, a quick caveat. So, not all of these swatches were made at the same time, and I used different paper and slightly different swatching techniques, both out of a lack of experience when I started swatching and also just adding and taking out things in my swatches that I found useful or not. These differences will affect granulation, water load, dispersion, overall appearance. So just keep that in mind when you're looking at the results. Okay, now that I got that out of the way, let's get to the science. So, are Phoenix Professional watercolors made with the same recipes as the Winsor and Newton Professional watercolors? There's a rumor that they're identical or nearly identical, and we want to know, is it true? So, my hypothesis is based on the identical pigment names in the marketing and the very similar hue ranges. My hypothesis is Phoenix Professional paints are using either the same or extremely similar pigment recipes as Winsor and Newton, just at a lower pigment concentration. So my materials are my 36 tube set of my Phoenix Professional watercolors, my Winsor and Newton Professional tubes in corresponding colors, and in total, after looking through my swatch book, I have 27 total matched pairs. And so again, because these swatches were made at different times over the last year with different paper, different techniques, the individual swatches may have variables beyond the paints themselves. And this is especially relevant for granulation, blooms, and dispersion. So in all of my swatches, I paint a mass tone, I paint a gradated wash, and occasionally I do a wet and wet as well. That really depends on when I did these swatches, because I didn't start doing a wet and wet until recently. I observed the pigment load, transparency, granulation, hue, and the flow of the paints. I recorded pigment codes and then compared them on the artistpigments.org database. And then I generated a table showing how often paints across all brands share identical multi-pigment recipes. And spoiler, it's usually far under 5% of all paints. And yes, is this super granular? Yes. But this is what I hope that y'all are here for. Y'all are here for very granular scientific experiments, research, and exploration of everything watercolor related. Okay, so as far as results, so my general observations, and you'll see that in a moment as well. My general observations are that as far as pigment load, the Winsor and Newton Professional single pigment paints are more pigmented overall. The Phoenix Professional paints are slightly less saturated because of the decrease in pigmentation and often benefit from an extra glaze for full chroma, comparable to the Winsor and Newton Professional. As far as the hue similarities, across almost all of the pairs, the hues are essentially the same. The only big difference, and you'll see in a second, was the cadmium-free red. The Phoenix Professional is noticeably cooler than Winsor & Newton Professional's version, but every other single pigment paint, or really in general, every paint was remarkably close. As far as identical pigment codes in single pigment paints, yes, they are all exactly identical. For example, burnt sienna is PR 101 across both. Lemon yellow is PY 175 across both. Aureolin is PY 40 across both. But this is not that unusual. Identical pigment paints across brands are pretty common. Um, and this is because paint manufacturers kind of rely on, number one, the same global pigment suppliers, but also because they know that when we see burnt umber, a lot of times what do we expect? We expect some mix of earth pigments, usually PBR7, but not always. Um, so yeah, this wasn't that surprising to me. But the shocking part really came in the multi-pigment mixes. For every multi-pigment paint that I compared, um, Phoenix Professional and Winsor and Newton Professional used the exact same pigments in the exact same order. I'll point them out as we go along, but the multi-pigment mixes that I have available to me are New Gamboge, Sap Green, Naples Yellow, Burnt Umber, Van Dyke Brown, Indigo, Payne's Gray, and Lamp Black. And this level of recipe matching down to the specific pigments, the number of pigments, and the order in which they're listed as well, which usually corresponds to the order, the amount of which is used in the paint. This is extremely rare across unrelated brands. And so before we get to our swatches, I did make a table demonstrating this. So when I ran a comparison search across multiple brands, so again, the source was artistpigments.org. I searched for example. For New Gamboge, I searched for Gamboge. And this is a mix of PY 150 and PR 209. And when I first got these paints, that's what kind of started all of this, because this is a mix that I've only seen in Winsor and Newton, and Michael Harding has the same mix as well, for not for their Gamboge. They call that something different. Um, so you can see that there were 54 total of some Gamboge paint, New Gamboge, or just Gamboge, or Gamboge hue. There were 54. Out of all of those, 5 paints use these pigments in this exact order. This includes all of these include the 2 that we're talking about, Winsor Newton Professional and Phoenix Professional. So the percentage of the paints that use this is about 9.3%. It doesn't get any higher than this. As you can see for the rest of them, for example, sap green, and y'all know that sap green is very variable across a lot of different brands. This particular mix of PG36 and PY110, there are 110 varieties of sap green in watercolor. Only 3 of them use this exact mix in this order, and the other one was Turner. And Turner actually shows up a couple of times after this on our list, which is kind of funny. So only 2.7% of the paints in the database that are sap green use this exact pigment in this exact order. So just so you know, so that we don't go through every single one of them, you can see that going down, um, fewer than 5% of paints share identical multi-pigment mixes. So the fact that all of these Phoenix mixtures match Winsor and Newton so precisely is statistically sus. It's statistically very unusual, basically. Okay, so kind of going through the swatches. So these include the paints in the 36 tube set, but also include some of the paints from the 24 pan set that I bought prior. If you have any questions about that, just check out my previous video that answers all those questions. So Aureolin. So remember, generally what I found was that for single pigment paints, Winsor and Newton tends to be more pigmented overall. So you can see that very clearly here. where it's much more pigmented. Again, same exact pigment. Phoenix Lemon, more pigmented on the Winsor and Newton side, same pigment. The cadmium free yellow, so even though these are technically multi pigment mixes, Winsor and Newton annoyingly does not tell you what those pigments are. So I can't really compare these fairly, honestly, but given that they both have the same name and the hue is essentially the same, I will still say that this one is much more pigmented. New Gamboge is a multi-pigment mix. I found that the multi-pigment mixes were more close in pigment load, generally speaking, and frankly, I cannot really tell the difference between these two paints. I mean, if they were not labeled, I would not really know. And you can see that their transparency is very similar, their mass tone is very similar, and of course, their pigment mix is exactly the same in the exact same order. Again, same situation with the cadmium free red where I can't really compare them, but given that they have the same name, the Phoenix Professional is much cooler than Winsor and Newton's version. So again, I can't really compare them. But so for permanent rose, I do think that Winsor and Newton is more pigmented, but hue wise, spot on. Quinacridone magenta, same exact situation. Phoenix Violet versus Windsor Violet, it's basically just dioxazine violet, exact same situation. I would say that the pigmentation between these is actually pretty similar. French Ultramarine, this one is was a really tricky one. You can see that in mass tone, they are essentially the same. But it's really hard to test them one to one because I use cold pressed paper on this one. My swatching technique was totally different. And here I use cold press. Excuse me, did I say cold press for this? I meant hot press for this one. Cold press for this one. So you can see that it's totally different, but hue wise, it's extremely similar. The equivalent of phthalo blue, more pigmented, hue wise, pigment wise, the same. The manganese blue hue, again, these granulating paints suffer a little bit because I use different types of paper, but all of it being said, I think the hue is pretty dang similar. The pigment is the same. Yeah, the phthalo turquoise is really similar with respect to pigment load as well. If they were not labeled, I might say that I couldn't really tell them apart, honestly. Same goes for Phoenix Green or Windsor Green, which is just phthalo green. They are extremely similar in hue, in intensity. Yeah, couldn't tell them apart. Same goes for this one. The swatches look really different, again, for the reasons that I've already mentioned, but overall, I find them to be really similar. The sap green, again, unfortunately, not swatched on the same paper, but overall, I found them to be pretty similar. This one looks a lot more yellow on camera. Um, and it might be due to just having used more paint, but I've painted with both of these and they're pretty similar. Naples yellow, essentially the same. Yellow ochre, again, hard to tell here because I used so much more paint on the swatch, essentially the same. Raw umber, both PBR7. These to me are indistinguishable. I really like Winsor Newton's raw umber too. It's not giving raw umber to me, but I like it as a raw sienna, to be honest. The burnt sienna, given differences in swatching, I could not probably tell them apart. These are very close in hue and in pigmentation as well. Burnt umber. So this is one of the multi-pigment mixes, and this one has 3 pigments in it. And y'all, you can see that not only do they look really similar, but they have the same name. They use the same 3 pigments and they use them in the exact same order. For light red, they both use PR102. These are so similar and they're swatched on essentially the same paper with pretty similar technique. Could not tell them apart if I didn't know which one was which. Indian red. So again, the granulation didn't really come out on this Winsor & Newton swatch. You can see very nicely here that the granulation is just beautiful. But overall, I find them to be pretty similar. On camera, I know this one looks a lot more violet than this one. But they're actually incredibly similar. Again, I think it's even the paper that you use can sometimes change the hue of what you're painting. Van Dyke Brown looks really similar to me and uses the exact same pigments in the exact same order. Indigo, yeah, pretty much the same. I'm kind of basing myself off of mass tone and off of the most diluted washes because, again, the technique is so different, but pretty dang similar. Payne's Gray to me is undistinguishable. Do y'all like how I accidentally cut the edge of this one off? So to me, these look pretty indistinguishable. Lamp Black, I mean, it's black, but overall the same. It's a multi-pigment mix, PBK6, PBK7, exact same order. Ivory Black, which is both PBK9, to me look exactly the same. So, where does that leave us? So, my conclusion is that based on the nearly identical hues across 27 pairs, uh, nearly identical, in fact, identical single pigment paints, and identical multi pigment mixes across 8 different mixes, and with, the extremely low likelihood of that happening by chance based off of our research. My conclusion is Phoenix Professional paints are most likely using the same underlying color recipe as the Winsor & Newton Professional paints, just at a lower pigment concentration. They're slightly less pigmented, and because of that, they're less intense on the first pass. But overall, they're very pleasant to paint with, and they have excellent behavior in wet and wet. They make beautiful smooth washes. So I would say that my value assessment is for the price point of the Phoenix Professional 36 tube set. I personally don't mind sacrificing a bit of pigment load. These paints overall perform extremely well, especially for artists on a budget or those who want a large variety of colors without spending hundreds of dollars. And like I said in my last video, again, I'll have it linked somewhere. These the 36 tube set included unusual pigments, and I think that it would be so much more expensive to try them out if you're a painter on a budget, and it's nice to just get it in one big set. So, thank you for coming along with me with all this research. If you enjoy scientific investigations and research like this, definitely don't forget to subscribe and yeah, follow along for all my adventures. Thank you for joining me at Watercolor Scientist, where we ask weird questions, we test our hypotheses, and we share our results with the world. Okay, bye.